I am alive today because of three things. My mother's quick thinking, our maid's courage, and the fact that I had an American passport. My father was born in Romania, and he came to the United States when he was a little boy. And when he was older, he decided to go take a trip around the world. And of course, he stopped in Romania and met my mother, and he never went anyplace else because they got married and they had 3 children. Every time a child was born, my father would go to the American consulate and said, "Oh, I'm here to declare another American citizen." So even though... Okay, thank you.
Is that better?
Is it better? It's okay. It ain't working. It's working. Thank you. Anyway. So, anyway, even though I was born in Romania, I was never a Romanian citizen. I was always an American citizen. When I was 5 years old, my father decided that things weren't so very nice in Romania, that we were going to go back to the United States. He left when I was 5 years old, and when we were supposed to leave after him, Paris was occupied and the Germans wouldn't let anyone get out of Romania. When I was born, there was a king in Romania. I have lived under every political government that exists in this world so far. When I was born, there was a king. His name was King Carol, and when things got kind of dicey, he decided to leave Romania, and his son became the king of Romania. His name was Michael. In Romania, there was a neo-Nazi party who invited the Germans to come in and advise. And they came in as allies of Romanians. And then they decided to make laws. Some of the laws were that the Jews, even though you were born in Romania, you would lose your citizenship. So my mother, who had lived in Romania all her life, lost her Romanian citizenship. She did not have a citizenship. The Jews were not allowed to own property. They were not allowed to own radios. They were not allowed to have businesses. And then people started to become missing. One night, it was about 11:30 at nighttime, there was a knock on the door, and the maid opened the door, and my mother was right in back of the door, and the soldier said, "We came to check the Goldberg's papers." Well, that's the way Jewish people used to disappear. They would come at nighttime or early in the morning, and then the next day, the Goldbergs wouldn't be there. However, my mother's quick thinking signed to our maid, Paulina, who was really a young girl, and I can still hear her kind of clearing her throat, and she's saying, "Well, the Goldbergs are not home." So we ran out through the window because we had the entrance to the apartment here. We lived in an apartment house, 2-story apartment house. The entrance was here, and some of our windows were in the back, so we ran out through the windows. We took the trolley to my aunt's house. And the next morning, my mother went to the Swiss legation. By that time, there was no American consulate in Romania. The Swiss legation took care of all the Allied citizens, the British and the Americans. So my mother told them they came for us last night, and when somebody from the legation called out the police and they said, "Why are you looking for the Goldbergs?" And they said, "Well, we're just checking their papers." And the legation told them that we are protected by the Swiss government. As a matter of fact, there is a picture of my passport in the museum, and if you'll take a look at it, it is a French passport. It's a Swiss passport. And to show you how things were in Romania at that time, there is a Russian stamp, there is the passport, which is in French, from the Swiss. There is nothing about Romania, even though this was taking place in Romania. The Germans also decided, but because we were Jews, we weren't as hungry as everybody else. So what they used to do is that everybody had a card with stamps. And if you were Jewish, the stamp had a line through it, which meant that if you had a half a loaf of bread a day, the Jews would get a quarter of a loaf of bread. And then the Allies, first the Russians started to bomb, which was not so very, well, it wasn't too bad because they weren't as good as when the Allied came, the American and the British. It's kind of interesting. You see, the way you see in the movie, the way the bomb comes and falls down, it really does whistle. And I remember one night my mother was sick and the doctor had told her to stay in bed, not get out. And my mother said, you go and stay with go with the neighbors to the shelter. And I said, no, I'm going to stay with you. And what I did was I went into bed with her, and I put my head on her lap, and she put a pillow over my head. And what she didn't realize, that every time she heard the whistle, she'd press the pillow on my ears, and I would say, it's coming, there's another one, there's another one. Anyway, thank heavens I am here to tell you the story. Another thing, besides the bombing, Italy has a volcano called the Vesuvius, and every time the Vesuvius would decide to spit out lava, we in Bucharest the house would start shaking. When we went to shelters, some of the shelters were, if you were lucky, there was a basement that you could go to. People who did not have access to a basement had to go into shelters. It was dug in the earth in a zigzag fashion. The thought was that if the bomb falls on one side, at least the people on the other side could get out. When I was 5 years old, my aunt, just before the war, I should have gone before, anyway, before the war, my aunt invited me to come and stay with her for a while. She lived in the Carpathian Mountains. And it was a beautiful place, absolutely lovely. What I didn't know at the time was that there was a very famous person that lived in the Carpathian Mountains. The area where I was Transylvania. I don't know if any of you have heard of Transylvania and Count Dracula. He comes from there. As a matter of fact, his palace is now being sold. The communist government had it. They appropriated for all this time, and now it was given to the rightful owner, which is an architect in New York, and he's not interested in the castle in Romania. So he is trying to sell it for, I don't know, $7 or $8 million or something like that. I would love to go visit it, but anyway. It has a terrible story. I guess the people who are interested in blood and gore, they would be very interested in this castle, but who has $8 or $7 million? Before the war, before the Nazis came in, we used to have, Bucharest was a small, it was they called it Petit Paris, which means the small Paris. We had theaters, we had movies, we had concerts. And one of the things I can still remember is my mother used to make me take a nap, even though I was a big girl, I was 7 years old. And at nighttime she would take me to there's a big park in the middle of Bucharest, and it's still there, thank heavens. And the Queen's Band would play Strauss waltzes, which is very lilting and all that stuff. It was a beautiful time. And when I think of Romania, I think of the concert at nighttime and the beautiful smell. They had linden trees, which has a beautiful smell, and that whole area was permeated with the fragrance of linden trees. The Germans were there for a lifetime. And when the King Michael decided that things weren't going so well, so what they decided to do is they decided to switch sides. So they somehow or another wrote to the Allied citizens, and they became allies. They just switched sides. Instead of the German side, now we were on the American and British side. Since the Germans had helped to camouflage everything, in 3 days they did more damage than the Allied did in years, because they knew where everything was. They would go ahead and they would sign, they would have the alarms ring, and then everybody would go to the shelters, then they would sing "They're all clear," and that's when they would start bombing, when the people were out of the shelters. It was a very difficult time, but the schools, Jews were not allowed to go to a regular school. So, but that didn't matter as far as I was concerned, because my mother had decided a long time before that I was going to go to the same school that I went to. As a matter of fact, I had the same teacher as she did. Her name is Miss Evelyn. I can still see her. She used to wear lovely shoes, and I always had a thing for shoes. Every day I'd take a look, she'd walk in, I'd take a look at the shoes. And she was very nice. When they came, one day we were in our classroom, and the principal came and told us, take everything that belongs to you, walk with your partner, and walk out of the class, out of the school. And when they opened the door, the German soldiers were on either side, so we had to walk through this, what is it called? Gauntlet, I think it's called. And we had to go home. Since we didn't have a school, they decided that we are going to go ahead, each class was going to go to a different temple. And we would have to wait until the men said their morning prayers, and then we would go in. And one day, I went to school and I just didn't feel like it. You know that feeling. I don't feel like going to school today. I'm sure you all had that day. I mean, that feeling. And I stood in front of across the street in front of the temple where my class was, and I just didn't feel like going in. And then I decided it was time to go home. So I went home, and my mother was very, very angry. How could you skip school? I mean, you don't do that. No matter what, you have to study. And later on, she was angry for a long time until she found out that the Nazis, the Romanian Nazis, were in the temple while I was waiting, looking outside, standing in front of the temple across the street. They were beating Miss Evelyn in front of the children that were there. We were about 9 years old. Because, as I mentioned before, the food was scarce, my mother, when I was about 10 years old, she decided that she was going to let me go to my aunt's house on my own, which was a big deal. I had to take the trolley. She put me in the trolley, and I went to my aunt's house. And my aunt gave me something to drink, and then she said, okay, you're going back home. And I thought, what's going on? And she carried this bag for me. And then when we got to the trolley, she said to the conductor, please tell her when this such and such a station is, because that's where she has to get off. And she put this bag underneath, and she said, when the conductor tells you this is the, let's say, Main Street, you take the bag and you get off the trolley. So I did that. What I didn't know is that I was carrying contraband. I'm sure you know what contraband is. You don't know what contraband is? That's something that's illegal. I was carrying, there was such a thing as called black market. And as long as you had money, in that case, I was carrying flour. And that day, Mama made bread. Another time, my uncle and I were walking on the street, and he was carrying this package, and he had sugar at the bottom of the bag, and then dirty, dirty socks and filthy handkerchiefs on top. And we were stopped by the soldiers. And they said, what's in the bag? And my uncle said, well, I'm bringing my dirty laundry so that my sister can wash it. And of course, they weren't going to touch the stuff. So they asked them to move it around so they could see what was in the bag. And my uncle knew how to push it around so that the sugar was never shown. All they did see was dirty laundry. And they let us go. And let me tell you, talk about scared. That was a goodie, because if they would have found out what we had in the bag, there was absolutely no excuse. That would have been the end of it for my uncle and myself. When King Michael decided to switch sides, the Allied came and the Communists. I guess they must have had some sort of a decision like they had in Germany. The Russians came to power in Romania. When there was the truce, I remember one night my mother was, there were all kinds of church bells ringing, and I woke up and I asked my mother, what's going on? And Mama said, we're switching sides. The Allies are coming. And then she started to cry. And I said, why are you crying? She said, well, she said, I know what we have, we don't know what we're getting. As far as I'm concerned, the only difference between the Russians and the Germans is that they did not pick the Jews. If you were walking on the street and you had a watch that they liked or a winter coat that they liked, they liberated from you. They didn't ask you what your name was. You see, with the Germans, they would have asked you, make sure that you were Jewish. But the communists didn't care what your religion was. They would just democracy in action. Just took the coat and took the watch. I've seen soldiers, Russian soldiers, wearing watches from the wrist to the elbow. And some of them at that time, I'm not sure that they knew how to read. But anyway, I guess the style was as many watches, more watches the better it was. The joke among our friends was the Russians is teaching us democracy. What is mine, what is yours is mine. And they continue to prove that little saying true. I was very fortunate that I lived under the communist regime for 2 years, and then when I was almost 14, I forgot to tell you about school. No matter what, you had to study. By the time I came to this country, I had started with zoology when I was 7, then botany, then chemistry and physics. I don't like chemistry, and I don't like physics, and astronomy. We also had to study Hebrew because, of course, this was a Jewish school. We studied French and German, and of course, we spoke Romanian. So when I came here, has anybody lived in a different country? Have they had that experience? No? You did not? You did live in a different country? What country? Italy? Then you know that it is difficult to make the change, to become acclimated. I mean, I said to myself, these crazy Americans, instead of telling me what street to go to, they're telling me what number to go to and then the street. I couldn't understand it. And the fact that everybody was called you, because in Romania, I'm sure in Italy too, they go ahead and they say you for children your age. For an older person, it is a polite way of saying you. You never say you, Felicia. You say, if Felicia is older than I am. She's not. I would have to say the French has a word, it's called votre, right? Vous. Okay. And that is a polite way of addressing a person. I wish I could tell you what it was like to see the Statue of Liberty, but I didn't see it because we came on a merchant marine ship. This is a ship that it does the hard work. It brings stuff from the United States to the troops in Europe. And it was ship that they used to say it was called a Liberty ship, and they made them, and they built the whole thing in about a month or so. And being in the Atlantic Ocean in December, it was beautiful. Everybody sunned themselves. Being in the Atlantic Ocean in January, that's a different story. One night, they woke us up and they told us to put our life jackets on. And my brother and I looked out the porthole and we couldn't see the sky because the ship was listing so badly. And some other excitement. After the war, they went ahead and they swept the sea. They were trying to get all the mines out because the Germans had mined the Atlantic Ocean. And they were trying to get all the mines. The only thing is that one day I was on board on the deck, and everybody stopped talking, and everybody stopped. And I said, "What's going on?" And they pointed to a mine. It was like everybody held their breath until that mine passed by the ship because we didn't know where it was going to go. Anyway, we had this excitement 3 times. When we came to Philadelphia, we didn't know how to speak English. My mother spoke several languages, but very, very little English. And a social worker came to the ship and took us to the train and told us, somebody is going to meet you at the train station in New York City. And she asked my mother, "Do you have any money?" And Mama had exchanged money with an Air Force soldier, American Air Force soldier. And Mama gave him Romanian money, which is called lei, and he gave her $35, a 20, a 10, and a 5. And Mama, being the lady that she was, she decided that she should tip waiter, William. He was a very nice guy. He tried to teach us where we can find a telephone. It was kind of interesting because he spoke English and we spoke Romanian. But anyway, we got the point. And when the social worker asked if Mama had money, she opened up, bless you. She opened her wallet and she started to scream because all she had was a 10 and a 5. She had given William the $20. So the social worker took her back to the ship and said to William, she made a mistake. She didn't mean to give you the $20. And William very nicely gave my mother the $20 back, and Mama insisted that he take $5. He was really a very nice man, and I will never forget him. So the social worker took Mama back to the train. We got on the train, and the social worker said something to the conductor, and we got to New York. And the conductor was a very sweet man. He took us, instead of leaving us on the platform, where I understand there was a man with a big sign saying, "Welcome, the Goldbergs." He took us to the information desk at Grand Central Station. Well, if you have ever seen Grand Central Station, or if you have seen pictures of Grand Central Station, it is a humongous place. And we sat there and we waited and waited and waited. And finally, Mama decided to start talking with people to see if she can do something about us not spending the whole night in Grand Central Station. And she tried Bulgarian, and she tried Romanian, and she tried French, and finally she decided she was going to speak Yiddish. Have you heard of Yiddish? Yiddish is a Jewish language that's similar to German. Yes? No? Yes. My mentor over there. She spoke Jewish to this man who finally, thank heavens, he understood what Mama was talking about. So he went ahead and he took us to the police station in Grand Central Station. And this woman came out and she had on a uniform and she was a policewoman. And I said, wow. a woman policewoman, and this was 1946. So I said, this is exciting stuff. She took us to a place called HIAS, which is Hebrew Immigration Association of America, or something like that. And we spent the night there, and then I was almost 15, and they gave me, I was small, skinny, I was hungry, and they gave me a doll, and my brother, who was 10, they gave him a choo-choo train. And the next day, somebody came and talked with my mother and said, do you have anybody? You can laugh. They asked my mother if they had anybody in New York. So my mother said, my sister-in-law's name is Brushansky. Now, if you have heard of Brooklyn, Brooklyn has a big phone book. And they called all the Brushanskys listed in Brooklyn until they found my aunt. Coming to America, to the changes, the difference in the bread, we had dark bread that didn't taste very good. I was hungry, and if somebody would have woken me up and given me a piece of bread, and peanut butter. Peanut butter was something I had never tasted before. It was something absolutely unusual. It was great. And it was lovely. Anytime, at any time of the day and night, you give me peanut butter. Now I think I've had my fill of peanut butter, but it took quite a few years to get there. Just the language, and I don't know why, but some people think that if they speak louder, you will understand the language. There is nothing wrong with the hearing. It's just that, really, it's true. Take a look at some people speaking to foreign people who don't speak the language. I don't know why they think that loud shouting is going to help them. Anyway, so I had lots of people shouting at me. But I also had some very nice people who, I remember this group of girls, I was outside, and this group of girls came over and started talking with me, and of course I didn't know what they were talking. And one of them spoke, again, Yiddish to my mother, and my mother told them we just came to this country and I didn't know how to speak English. So they took me by the hand, literally, and took me to a candy store and bought me my first ice cream cone. And then they would just walk down the street and said, tree, car, and that's the way I learned how to speak English. Luckily, when I went to school, I was very fortunate many times. I ended up in the same class where my friends were, so they took me under their wing. And when they went to lunch, I went to lunch. When they went to get a drink, I went to get a drink because I didn't know how to express myself. I didn't know how to say water or where's the bathroom or anything. So whatever they did, I did. And they were very nice. And because we were the first Americans in 1946 in that school, they didn't know what to do with us. So I had an elocution teacher, an individual class, and he, Mr. Romano, tried to tell me how to say Long Island. And he made me exercise with Betty, butter, border, bitter, butter, better, whatever. Anyway. To learn how to, this language is very difficult. You know, I asked a teacher one time, give me a rule so I can learn the rule. She said, there are so many exceptions to the rule that you'll never learn it that way. You know, you just go ahead. And also, there is no TH sound in Romanian. So, you know, my husband, one day I said to him, could you please give me the thumbtacks? And he started to laugh, and I didn't know why. And then, of course, I was insulted. I mean, but I still have to think about 33, because otherwise it comes out thumbtacks. It's easier. One of the things that I learned about United States, I love the fact that we are free. We are free to do whatever, well, within limits. within laws. We are free to do whatever we want. We are free to say whatever we want. And we don't have to worry that somebody is going to come in the middle of the night and take us away. The fact that I can go any place, and now I'm going to need a passport, but the fact that I don't have to ask permission from anybody, it is a marvelous thing. The fact that I can go ahead and decide who I'm going to vote for and vote for that person. Voting is a privilege that not too many countries have. As you know, what's going on all around the world. And we have this privilege, which is great. And if we are not satisfied with the present government, in 2 years we have a chance to make it better. Or make it worse, whichever way it's going to go. But the fact that we can do it is an absolutely marvelous thing. Anyway, I think that's about it. Oh, I cannot forget some people. Even though there was this woman in Romania during the Nazi regime, she was a neighbor of ours, and she used to go ahead and she would call us, the Jews, my brother and I, and when we walked into her room, there was a picture of Hitler on the wall. And she would give us cookies when she had, or she would give us bread when she had it. And then when Romania switched sides and the communists were there, she invited us in, and in the same spot, the same frame, I think, Stalin's picture was there. The thing is, the way to learn things, the way to survive, is you have to be flexible. You have to be able to, I guess, go with the flow. Anyway, thank you for coming. And do you have any questions? Yes?
Can you speak in Romanian language?
Well, the Romanian language is a Romance language. There are 5 languages: Romanian, French, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. And if I say ce faci, which is Romania, ce face is Italian. Or casa is the same thing in Italian and in Romanian. And eu mă cheamă Beatrice Goldberg. That means my name is Beatrice Goldberg. So it's a very easy language to learn, I think. If you have learned anything, any kind of Romance language like Italian or French, it's easy. That's another thing. Because of my background, when I was graduating high school in New York, I was praying. I had a 95 in Latin. That was my final mark in Latin. And I was praying for a 65 in English, because if I didn't pass my English test, I couldn't graduate. I got it. Thank heavens. Anyway. Anything else? You have been very patient. Thank you. You're welcome, dear.